Welcome to my How Healthy Are You weekly educational podcast. My name is Dr. Thomas Brewer. I'm a PhD chemist and nutritional blood microscopist. In this podcast, I'm going to be talking about anti-aging. Some people think of it as age reversal or slowing down the aging process. So I'm going to give a lot of basic and, let's say, a little bit of advanced information, and I'm going to be talking more about this in the coming weeks because it is a very large topic. So if we just look at what's ahead for us, there's 4 really big killers and diseases that lead to death. The first is heart disease. We have a 23% chance of getting heart disease, whether we die from it or not. Diabetes is about the same, 25%. That's just inexcusable to have 1 out of 4 people with some form of diabetes. Alzheimer's is 10%, and it's very debilitating. And then the big one, cancer, 40%. 40% chance of having some form of cancer doesn't necessarily mean you die from it. So these are all very serious diseases. Now, what happens is we end up killing ourselves with 1,000 small cuts. This is an old term, death by 1,000 cuts. So we do many things in the course of our lifetime that aren't a big deal, but cumulatively it leads to a shortened life. And that's the main point of this podcast. So there isn't really one thing that causes us to die. It's a lot of cumulative effort. Now, you're going to hear some main fundamental, let's say, areas that will keep repeating. One of them is the word mitochondria, and then the other one is inflammation. Well, you're probably familiar with the word inflammation. Mitochondria are really the powerhouse of a cell. If you had high school or college biology, you were sort of forced to memorize how important the mitochondria was in a cell and how it's the power plant. Well, what happens is, as we age, the mitochondria function steadily declines. This is the main biochemical reason that we die and that we also develop various diseases that lead to death. So when the mitochondrial function, that's these powerhouses in our cells, as they decline, it leads to an increase in free radicals. Now, free radicals, we've heard of these, they damage cells, they also lead to cancer. So what happens is, as the mitochondrial function declines and we make these free radicals, well, our body responds by sending vitamin C from the food we eat to the liver. So the liver can make more antioxidants to fight off these free radicals. You say, well, that's good. Well, the problem is you don't have enough vitamin C then to make collagen. So collagen is what keeps our skin nice and elastic, and it's our connective tissue. So when we can't utilize our vitamin C the way it should be, and we send it off to the liver to fight off free radicals, the end analysis, the end game is you get the wrinkled and saggy skin. So the vitamin C, we would prefer it to interact with our amino acids to make collagen. But if it's all going to the liver, or a lot of it's going to the liver, we can't do that. Now, a lot of you may be taking collagen supplements. They're a complete waste. They will not help you make any collagen. So what I'm going to be talking about today is things you can do so that your skin doesn't sag. And it's not about supplementing with collagen. So it's all about inflammation, eliminating inflammation, various ways to do that, and keeping the mitochondria in your cells very active. So these mitochondria extract energy from the food you eat, and they combine it with oxygen. They make something called ATP. It's known as adenosine triphosphate, another term you probably memorized in high school or college, and that's what stores the energy. If your mitochondria are damaged, then there's excess free radicals made, like I had mentioned, and that's the problem. That's the inflammation, all the way up to cancer. So these antioxidants that we want to keep ourselves young, we want them to be made by the body. So we want our mitochondria making as many of them as it can, as well as so they can fight off the free radicals. So mitochondria will end up making free radicals as we age, so we want the mitochondria to make just as many antioxidants as free radicals, which will minimize the aging process. If we look back at age reversal and anti-aging, a lot of this was looked at way back in the 1950s and 1960s. It was all about inflammation and free radicals. Since then, we've gotten a little more scientific, but the basic information is still there, and it's something you need to do. So if your mitochondria slow down and you make these excess free radicals, guess what? That's where the inflammation comes from. So a study that was done about 4 years ago found that the fat molecules that form plaque in our arteries really don't come from the fat in the food we eat, but directly from our bad gut bacteria. So I'm starting to talk a little bit about heart disease. So remember, there's a 23% chance of getting heart disease. So we've been told all our lives about the fat in the food we eat, but mainly the heart disease stems from bad gut bacteria. So this would be the parasitic bacteria outnumbering the good probiotic bacteria. So our mitochondria, back to mitochondria, they evolved from bacteria, and they communicate with the bacteria in our gut. Even bacteria communicates with other bacteria. There's an interesting communication process. So if your gut bacteria are healthy, and one way to do that is to stop eating the foods that promote parasitic bacteria formation and start eating the foods that promote the good probiotic bacteria to flourish. That's one of the most important things you can do for longevity. Now, what are those foods? I'll talk a little more about them later, but sugars and sugar substitutes, they promote the bad bacteria, the unhealthy gut bacteria. And fruits and vegetables, they promote the good gut bacteria. And if you're in trouble, all you need to do is take some of my probiotics occasionally to make sure you have enough good probiotic bacteria to start with so that these good foods can keep those bacteria multiplying. Now, the next one was diabetes, 25% chance of getting that. So about 10 years ago, researchers were looking at macrophages. Now, that's a type of white blood cell. I mention them to people when I do a blood microscopy. So these are immature white blood cells, but they are very big for our immune response. So we want an immune response, especially if there's an invader in the body, like a virus, hint, hint, or any bacteria that doesn't belong there. But we don't want this immune response to get out of hand. It is a delicate balance. So these macrophages, if they find their way into healthy tissue, they release an inflammatory substance, and this is something you'll hear often, cytokines. And when you think of the word cytokines, it's inflammation. And the way it works with diabetes, these cytokines cause the other cells around them to become insulin resistant. We don't want our cells to be insulin resistant. We want our cells to be able to accept insulin because the insulin drags glucose or sugar with it. So if we're insulin resistant, then insulin doesn't get into the cell, which means sugars don't get into the cell. So the sugar builds up in our bloodstream, then we have diabetes. So excess blood sugar, that causes a lot of damage to your blood vessels, and that goes back to the heart disease issue. There is a bit of a link between heart disease and diabetes. So macrophages trigger inflammation in the tissue. It's called adipose tissue, but that's just fat. And some people that are thin will even have diabetes. And the reason is, no matter who we are, we have this fat near our organs called visceral fat. So this isn't the fat right under our skin, which is known as subcutaneous fat. And it's the visceral fat that's the dangerous fat. And this is the stuff that's very difficult to break down. You really have to have a good diet to not build too much visceral fat. Okay, so sugar also causes a lot of inflammation. And again, inflammation and our cells, inflammation in our, let's see, not that one, but let's see. Well, we'll stick with just inflammation. So small spikes in blood sugar have a very inflammatory effect on our vascular system, and then it even raises cancer risk. So sugar, you already know, is one of those foods to minimize or eliminate, right? The other foods that cause these sugar spikes, the blood sugar spikes, are grains. So grains and sugar. Well, what do we mainly eat? Grains and sugar. And that's why the average person does not have a life expectancy that they could have. So most of us really have the ability to live past 100 and maybe even past 110. It's just that we hurt ourselves with diet and poor sleep and environmental toxins, and very gradually we just decrease our chance to live a long life. So the third disease was Alzheimer's. Same thing, our immune cells, those macrophages in our fat create inflammation, and that leads to diabetes. But there's a similar type of immune cell in the brain that does the same thing, and they release those same inflammatory cytokines. So you remember cytokines, inflammation, and that's what happens in the brain. Then neurons start getting killed, and it leads to memory loss, and that's the root cause of Alzheimer's. So again, we don't want to have excess inflammation due to our own white blood cells, leading to these cytokines. The fourth one is cancer. Remember, 40% chance to get cancer. And again, it's back to inflammation, which is the perfect condition for cancer cells to proliferate, to multiply, and that's how we get tumors. Now, if I go back one step for cancer, back to the free radicals. Free radicals are unpaired electrons chemically, and that damages the DNA of cells, and that's how we get the mutations and the cancer. So a long time ago, back in 1931, there was a Nobel Prize provided or given to a German scientist. And what he discovered that dysfunctional mitochondria actually stop burning oxygen to make energy. Now, that's what we want them to do. We want the mitochondria to burn oxygen and make energy. But instead, they turn to a process called anaerobic metabolism. So anaerobic means no oxygen. Well, that then means that they're burning carbohydrates in the absence of oxygen. That's anaerobic metabolism, and that leads to cancer. So again, it goes back to having these strong and active and functioning mitochondria. So a couple of terms you'll hear about as I talk about this in the coming weeks is apoptosis, and the other one is autophagy. So apoptosis is a good thing. It's when healthy, controlled cells die, and that's what we want to happen. When the cells that we no longer need are destroyed and eliminated from the body or detoxed out of the body, that's a good thing. And what benefits that is good sleep. That's why they say when you sleep, it's like washing your dishes. And that's related to a term called autophagy, which means self-eating. So during autophagy, your own cells scan the body for the dead and diseased and worn out cells and removes them. So there's you get cells that when they're not needed anymore, they go through apoptosis, which means they die, right? And then we want to get rid of them through autophagy. And those are good processes, and that's what reduces inflammation, and it slows the aging process. So what can we do? Simple things. One is sleep. Sleep is extremely important. I've talked about this in the past. You'll want to start practicing nose breathing, where you're breathing in and out through your nose throughout the day so that when you go to sleep, you'll naturally nose breathe. This will help you make something called nitric oxide. It'll also start eliminating the need for a CPAP machine, etc. The other thing is you want to be exposed to red light before you sleep, not blue light. So the blue light is from our phones and computer screens and TVs. So if you just find a red light bulb, you can buy bulbs that change color or just buy a red light bulb. That's what you want to be exposed to for a little while before you go to sleep. The other thing is to turn off the Wi-Fi in your house so you don't have that Wi-Fi radiation around your brain at night. Diet-wise, well, you're going to like what's in the newsletter this week. I talk about chocolate, so that's a good one. Antioxidant and numerous other benefits. Berries, again, antioxidants, and we want our mitochondria to be able to not only make antioxidants, but we want the antioxidants we consume to be utilized efficiently. We don't want them all lost to the liver. Okay. Intermittent fasting is very important for the cellular autophagy that I was talking about, where we're cleaning the dishes. It's almost like sleeping correctly. When you sleep, you get this cellular autophagy. Intermittent fasting does the same thing. Coffee, green tea, also big and good. And of course, there's the bad things, which are going to be charred meats and a lot of the fried foods. All right, environmental toxins, boy, tough. I talk about fluoride in the newsletter as one of those. You can purify your air in your house. One great thing to do is, as often as you can, get out of the city, visit the mountains, go to an area where there's clean air. Now, another way we can shorten aging is to increase the length of our telomeres. So these telomeres are on the caps of our DNA, and they shorten with, guess what, stress and lack of exercise. So if you can't afford the product TA65 to increase the length of your telomeres, well, you want to reduce stress and you want to exercise. Another thing that's very good for age reversal, or at least slowing the aging process, is vitamin D, and I've talked about that in the past. And finally, avoid allergic foods. Even though a food may be good for you, if you're allergic to it, it is going to contribute to premature death. So you're going to want to find out the foods that you're allergic to. I do offer a food allergy test, and you can probably even get those from your medical doctor. But that's something to consider. It's really the basics of diet, is to avoid foods in which you're allergic. All right, so that's what I have for this installment of the podcast. I wanted to thank everyone for listening, a very important podcast. And as always, please don't keep me a secret.